Once upon a time, there was a loving couple who ran a circus. Their names were Betty and Bernie Godwin. The circus was a great success. They had amazing balancing acts that were the feature of every show. Betty wowed the audience on the flying trapeze, and Bernie stunned everybody when he rode his unicycle across a tightrope high in the air. You name it, Betty and Bernie's circus had that duo balancing act. Even Pete, the popcorn man, who had seen the show lots of times, loved seeing it again and again. It was famous across the land, and when the big top went up in the middle of town each year, the village folks would flock in the evening to the bright lights. It became known as Betty and Bernie's brilliant balancing circus. But Betty and Bernie were getting older and really wanted a family. They hoped that their children would make the brilliant balancing circus live on after them. In despair, after trying for a long time, they went to the wisest doctor in town, who advised use of a new virtual drug called Let's Have a Lot of 'Em. Things went well, and before long they had twins, Charlie and Charlie Ann. And soon after, quads, Dan, Danielle, Don and Donna. Betty was over 50 at the time, and Bernie even older. At first, when the 6 children were very little, all was well. They sat happily in the front row of the circus with their teddies, balanced on the jiggling knees of friendly audience members. They'd cry out with delight at each of the acts. Business boomed. As they grew up, the children wanted to take part in the show. The parents were pleased and taught them some of the easier balance tricks. But despite having the parents' genes, the children started to go wild. They fought over who should have the best places, and they didn't tidy up after practice. They just wanted to eat lots of chips and burgers and lollies and popcorn from the stall owners. They showed no respect for their mum and dad, and poor Betty and Bernie despaired. Disorder afflicted the family. Over time, things grew worse. Their behaviour was terrible, and the damage increased. Betty and Bernie tried everything, just to try to make things better. First, they asked the twins, Charlie Ann and Charlie, they were now teenagers, to get a bit of balance training discipline going with the quads. The twins were Keynes on this and started it up near the John in the main yard. It began okay, but in the end just didn't work. The 4 younger ones didn't have their hearts in it. They knew that in the evening show the twins always had the best act and got all the applause. They preferred to just mess about together and eat up their free dinner. It was boring. Disorder still afflicted the family. The parents desperately needed another bright idea. So they asked the local village person who always had a big view of what was going on. This was the Thatcher who built the roofs. She suggested that they let each of the children think up their own show. But that didn't work either. The selfish ones grabbed the best gear and became little show-offs. The have-nots with no gear were miserable. It was a hopeless performance. They found out later that despite having a good view working from the roof, the Thatcher was actually quite short-sighted. Betty and Bernie grew more and more weary and audiences dropped off. Even Pete, the popcorn man, lost interest. Yet more disorder in the family. Something had to be done. With no money coming in, the family began to starve. Bernie, who was now over 70, was weak and died of a deadly bug that was going around. This really woke up the kids because deep down they loved their dad. They realised they needed a new third way to run the show. Do you remember that balance had been their super special thing long ago in the past? They thought, maybe everybody working together and getting back to those balance tricks is the way to get the show going again. They put their heads together, with Betty, who was still sad, being as supportive as possible, a picture of Bernie beside her. They thought and totally rewrote the acts. The training they'd had in the past was useful. They practiced and practiced. They came up with some totally new acts, even though they were now 6 working together and cooperating. Rather than the old mum and dad pair, they made this a huge plus rather than a difficulty. They came up with a balance show like no other balance show that had been seen before. It was just the most brilliant balancing circus the world had ever seen. Well, did the show take off? The family had so much fun and the audiences came back in their droves. The family became even more popular when they gave some of their money to the poor street folk of the towns where they performed. These poor people then had enough money to come to the show and were much happier. Of course, it didn't stop there. The family had to keep using its imagination to dream up new and fabulous acts, usually stunningly and surprisingly simple. The audiences made suggestions too. All in all, it was a great way to be. For generations now, the brilliant balancing circus has been performing, with skills passed down the line. Agility, flexibility, zero fragility, and super stability is their motto. It carries them forward. Their stories, passed from one generation to the next, remind them of the earlier difficult times of long ago. So that's the end, really, of the story of the brilliant balancing circus. It's still going now, and it'll still be going in 100,000 years' time. Would you like to join them? They're always looking for new members.